This is a case that was done for a patient who presented with pain in their upper right premolar, which was caused by a cavity that had gotten into the nerve. When we took an x-ray of the tooth, we noted that there was a very deep cavity under an old crown on the patient's upper right second premolar, indicated by the blue arrows. This cavity had gotten into the nerve, which is indicated in red, and that's what caused the toothache. We discussed options and the patient decided that they wanted to save the tooth, so we made a plan to remove the old crown, excavate the tooth decay, and then do a root canal to relieve the toothache, and then finally make a new crown to restore the tooth. Before we get started with the footage, we also discovered on an anterior x-ray a similar situation of another cavity under an old crown on the upper right lateral incisor, indicated by the blue arrows. Fortunately, this cavity had not gotten into the nerve, so the tooth was not symptomatic and tested vital. So we made a plan to simultaneously address this situation by removing this crown and the tooth decay and then making a new crown for this tooth. So we're going to get into the clinical footage by first sectioning off the crown on the upper right premolar with a coarse diamond fissure burr on a high-speed handpiece. And this is a type of crown with a porcelain exterior and a metal base, and we typically have a simple time removing these crowns because we can clearly see when we've fully cut through the metal. So we're going to make a trough on the buccal and occlusal surfaces down to the tooth before applying some force with our crown separator, and the crown comes right off. Since the decay is on the mesial aspect of the tooth, we're going to open this area up a bit so that we can clearly see the lesion. And this is going to be a very subgingival crown margin, so we are going to use our electrocautery tip and do a generous gingivectomy until we have good access to the gingival margin of clean, healthy tooth structure. We're then going to begin excavating the lesion with a round carbide burr on a slow speed handpiece. And we can expect this to be a partially vital tooth due to the symptoms of irreversible pulpitis that the patient was experiencing. And we can see upon entry that the tooth is partially vital since it is bleeding when we enter the pulp chamber. And now that we have access to the pulp chamber, we're going to apply our rubber dam to isolate the tooth for the root canal procedure. Going to place some liquid dam to plug up any leaks. And then we're going to open up the pulp chamber with a Munch's Discovery burr on a slow speed handpiece. Going to make a little bit more room with a high speed, and then go back in with a very small Munch's Discovery burr to unroof the pulp chamber. And starting with the root canal instrumentation, sometimes I like to go in with a glide path file first to get it down halfway before introducing the orifice shaper to prevent ledges. So we're going to use our shaper, and then we're going to go in with our glide path file with the apex locator connected and some RC prep, and then take it down to the red line on the Root ZX2 apex locator. We'll continue with our subsequent files. This is a 1504, taking it down to the green line on the apex locator, irrigating, and then going in with our 2504 down to the green line. And I think for this file, the apex locator wasn't behaving, so I dried out the orifice, which usually helps. We'll then go down with our 2506, irrigate, and then use our sonic activator with some RC prep for about 10 or 15 seconds before washing that out with some more hypochlorite irrigation, and then going in with our final file, the 3504, and taking that down to the green line on the Root ZX2, irrigating and then activating once more, and then a final rinse, and now we're ready to begin drying the canal. So we'll take our F2 paper points to length, and the second point comes out mostly dry, and then third point comes out fully dry. So we'll begin introducing our bioceramic sealer into the canal as apically as we can get it, and then finishing with our gutta percha cone, in this case an F3. We're going to snip the excess and then sear off the rest with a heated plugger before going in with a round diamond to clean up the excess sealer. And we're going to place a core buildup. So I'm going to prep into the orifice a couple of millimeters for extra retention. And then we're going to etch the tooth to condition it for bonding. And here I actually decided that we would remove the rubber dam and then place a Tafelmeier band on the tooth to matrix it. And this is Equia Forte that we will use as our core buildup material, condensing it with a moist cotton pellet before leaving it for about 4 minutes to cure. Here's a post-op PA with the buildup in place, and we can see that there's a small sealer puff out the apex of the tooth. And then we'll remove our Tafelmeier band and begin finishing our preparation until we're back on to the margin of the natural tooth. So this is going to be a deep margin, and in these cases where I do a deep gingivectomy, I find that a cord doesn't help in the area that we zap. So once we're finished with the preparation, our cord is going to extend from the mesiobuccal around the distal and then terminate at the mesiolingual. So we'll begin packing our size 1 Ultra Pack cord into the sulcus until we have good visual access to the margin 360 degrees around the tooth. Going to cut the cord and then tuck in the rest before making some final refinements to the preparation with a KS1. And once that tooth is ready to scan, we're going to begin working on the lateral incisor with the big distal cavity. And we're going to start by sectioning the PFM crown off first with a KS1. And in this case, decided to actually section the crown all the way from the buccal gingival margin to the lingual gingival margin. And then removing the PFM with a crown separator. Going to refine the prep and remove the excess cement from the old crown. And here we can clearly see the lesion of decay on the distal surface of the tooth. So after some more refinement of the prep, we're going to actually place our cord first here. Another size 1 Ultra Pack. And once we have our cord tucked in, we're going to begin removing the tooth decay with a small carbide burr on a slow speed handpiece. And this tooth was vital and asymptomatic, so we would not expect this decay to go too close to the pulp. And there you can see the tooth decay has been fully removed, so we're going to get ready to bond in some core material. In this case, we're also going to use Equia Forte. And it's a small filling, so we decided not to matrix. We're just going to pack in the material freehand and then use a moist cotton pellet and then give it 4 minutes to set before going back in to remove the excess with a KS1 burr. And this type of core is mostly done just to insulate the pulp from hypersensitivity to temperature. So we're going to check our occlusal clearance, and I usually like to have about 1 millimeter of occlusal clearance, at least for my zirconia products. And once we're satisfied with the occlusal clearance and our prep form on both teeth, we're going to take our scan. And here's our scan output. Not every prep is going to look like it belongs in a textbook, since you kind of have to work with what you're given, but the most important thing is that we have adequate occlusal reduction, which you can see on the clearance map, and clear margins on the scan. So we're going to finish up the first appointment here by whipping up a couple of quick temporary crowns, and I make my attempts personally. So here I'm just removing the excess material along the margin. And then we're going to take 0.5 millimeter off of the occlusal surface right off the bat from both temporaries. We're going to remove our retraction cord. And then try the temporaries in and check the bite to ensure there's no contact on either of them. Going to reduce the high spots there before loading them both up with temp bond and then inserting them on the teeth. And I usually like to wait a minute or so for the temp bond to set before removing the excess from the margins. And then we're done. We're going to send the patient home with the expectation that the gums around both teeth are going to be quite tender for a few days. And then now we're going to get going on to the manufacturing process of the crowns. So once they've been designed by my designer, here's what they look like nested digitally in the puck of zirconia. And then we're going to send that to the milling machine, which is going to mill them out of the block. And then here's the two crowns after they've been milled. We're going to cut them out of the block with a lab handpiece and then smooth off the sprues. And once the crowns have been desprued, we're going to place them in a firing tray, which is going to go into the sintering furnace overnight. And when they come out the next day, we need to do is polish them, and then they're going to be ready to insert. So at the cement appointment, we're going to remove the temps and then try in the new crowns. And we're going to check the bite to verify with the patient that the bite feels comfortable. And I typically request my designer to leave my crowns about 0.3 millimeters out of occlusion, since any new contact is really going to feel like an interference. And then we're going to check our interproximal contacts with floss. And when we're satisfied with everything, we're going to take the crowns off, rinse and dry the intaglio before conditioning with a ceramic primer. And then we're going to pumice the teeth with a Profi cup, rinse off the preps thoroughly, and then dry them slightly. And then Jackie's going to load up the crowns with a Panavia resin cement. And then we're going to seat them on the preps. She's going to tack cure the excess cement. And then we're going to begin removing the excess with an Explorer. Go in with some floss to remove the excess interproximally. And give the teeth a thorough rinse. Make sure that all of our cement is cleared out. And this case is complete.